So I guess my question for the panel is, what do you find insufficient about this call for thoughts and prayers? Like, what made you decide to spearhead an event to have this conversation? Yeah.
Well, I could start. I mean, a lot of my work, I'm embarrassed to say, is motivated by people that make me angry. So I'm just going to be honest that I had a foil. I was the person who asked this group, this amazing group of people, to come together to think about putting on this workshop. Largely because in St. Louis there was a vigil that was planned right after the New Zealand massacre. It was, you know, interfaith. It was like show up, light your candle, and let's, you know, pray for the victims. I looked at the description and I didn't see any reference to the white nationalist, you know, impetus for these hate crimes. I didn't see any pointing of fingers to how the white nationalists in this country are fueling that hatred. And what I saw was symbolic representation of different faiths. So you had your Muslim, the one Muslim that could talk about this. You had some Christian minister maybe. And then because you have to invite, you know, it has to be interfaith, and by interfaith we only mean monotheistic religions, they invited a rabbi and they invited the Anti-Defamation League. And I'll be honest, I lost my shit. I saw the Anti-Defamation League and I was like, why? Why is this group coming to a vigil to lift up, you know, these Muslim victims, when I know that the ADL is peddling anti-Muslim racism? And what do I mean by that? They're complicit in this conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. I, as a Palestinian, feel very targeted. I feel targeted by the ADL, not only for this conflation, but physically targeted, because in the 1990s, when all kinds of activism was happening on the West Coast, in the Bay Area, Palestinians were finding common cause with the anti-apartheid movement for South Africa. The ADL provided information to the FBI about activists in the Bay Area, and led to the assassination of a Palestinian activist by a Jewish extremist group. So like, this is not like playing around, this is not just my ideology, but this is like serious threats. So that when people that say they're in solidarity with Muslims are lifting up the ADL as something, as a group that can sit at the same table, can be at the vigil and cry, I was like, no way. So that's the reason we're here. But it's not the only reason we're here, but that was the motivating factor. So I want to be clear that the violence against Muslims, the violence against Jews, is not simply because we don't understand each other religiously, right? It's not like, oh, if we sit together and we study each other's texts and study each other's spiritual practices, then everything will be fine. This is a very dangerous idea that I think is perpetuated in a lot of spaces, right? That all we need to do is come together and pray together and understand that we pray to the same God, then everything will be fine. But I think it's missing the structural analysis of how all of these kinds of hatred are connected by state power, by white supremacy, and this, you know, we fall into a lot of traps, I think, by going to the interfaith side of it. On the Palestine issue, I see this all the time, and that people just think that interfaith dialogue is the way forward, right? Palestinians, I'm Christian, okay? I'm a Palestinian Christian. And I just want to say, Maliha mentioned the different definitions of jihad. When I was pregnant with my son, my grandmother and I were talking about different names. Maybe we could, and she's this old Christian woman from Palestine. What should I name my son? You know, we're trying to imagine, and we were choosing Arabic names. And she said, Jihad. I just love the name Jihad. That's the best name I can, you know. It was like, I call her Teta. I said, Teta, I don't know if that's the best name for us to choose. I understand why you think it's beautiful, but we have members of our family named Jihad. So this is an Arabic name that has a lot of spiritual meaning, not only for Muslims, but also for Christians. So while I'm a Christian, I come from a Muslim majority country. My culture is Palestinian, and you can't separate, Christian Palestinians from Muslim Palestinians. So all of this, mixture of cultures, we don't know what's religious versus what's cultural. So.
So much of what Sandra said about kind of some of the pitfalls of what we might call faith washing, right? I think that's part of it, and I think a vigil is great, people coming together as a first step, or if it's rooted in kind of a critique of imperialism and a critique of capitalism and a critique of how these state powers have vested interests, right, in these various, so for example, the U.S. again, going back to like U.S. arms deals, right, and the amount of money that's profited from that, right, whether it's bombing Muslims in Yemen, right, under the signature of Hillary Clinton, or whether it's, continuing to support $38 billion worth of money for the Israeli Defense Forces that are bombing Gaza right now, right? And so I think thinking about these connections, it's really a disservice to not name where some of this, where anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim violence stem from on a structural level. I guess the other thing is, so often the various Jewish institutions get a claim on what anti-Semitism is. And I think there's a lot of us in this room that have been working against that, right? And trying to, and there's been, I think, a change in, the last, I remember in 2002 when I was, doing organizing on my college campus, it was like hush hush to even say the word occupation, right? And so I think in some ways for privileged Jews such as myself, there's like a lot of shift in that dialogue, right, in critiquing Israel. But I think there's still this way in which you need permission, right? You need you need to be given proper authority and vetted by the correct Jewish institutions in order to talk about anti-Semitism. And I really reject that. And my generation is not as much of an institutional generation. We have our own egalitarian queer minions throughout the country. Like, we do our own thing. We don't, we don't rely on Jewish institutions in the same way. And so I think I see myself as very much a part of that broader trend and that broader generation.